Good morning. So I am here to present on two really important but really sensitive topics. So I want to state that at the beginning. I know that some of this information is going to be maybe a little emotional, maybe a little sensitive. Just wanted to prep everyone on that. But it is, there are two critical topics that we have to cover today. And thank you, Dr. Salito, for giving me an extra 10 minutes to do so, because I crammed a lot of slides into a half-an-hour presentation and I was going to be rushing through. So I'll be able to go a little bit slower. I also wanted to state that I'm not an expert here, so I'm here to share information. I am a school psychologist at the high school, for those of you who don't know me. I'm also the team lead for mental health. And so I'm presenting this information based on several presentations and workshops that I've attended and experienced through the years, particularly at the high school. I'm certainly available for questions at the end, or if you want to email me afterwards, but I just wanted to state that I don't consider myself an expert in this area. So we'll go with that. The information is adapted from several different workshops and conventions I attended over the years, as well as there is a new law called the Nathan Bruno Jason Flatt Act. You all may have heard of it, and that requires suicide prevention training of all staff every year. So this is our first year we're doing it. We will have to do something every single year to kind of maintain that suicide prevention. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. I also wanted to thank a colleague of mine, Dr. Terry Seelig. She is a school psychologist in New Hampshire who I met when I was the delegate for Rhode Island to the National Association, and she also did a presentation on preventing youth suicide and allowed me to borrow some of her slides so that I could put this one together as well. So I'm going to go over suicide prevention first and spend the majority of time looking at that because that is our requirement for this year. But I also am going to touch upon the threat assessment piece as well. So about 4 years ago, I presented on threat assessment in the district when there was a law that was passed about threat assessment teams. So every school had to set up a threat assessment team and have a functioning team that could conduct threat assessments should we have a threat to the school or to a group of students or a threat towards another student. I did present that and got some pretty good feedback. Teachers were happy to hear that information and hear what we were doing in the school. So I am going to go over that again. Some of it may seem familiar to you if you've been here for more than 4 years, and for those who are new employees, we have a lot of them. I thought it would be good information to provide. So first we're going to start with suicide prevention. People still ask, why should we address this in the schools? And there are plenty of reasons. Here are just 4. I don't know if you all are familiar with the fact that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among children ages 10 to 24. Sometimes it actually bumps up to 2nd, depending on the year. The top 2, accidental injury is number 1, and the 2nd is homicide. So it is up there. It can affect students' academic performance, obviously. Mental health is a big piece, as you all know, and you see in the classrooms. It can affect the whole community if we do have a tragedy of suicide. And in fact, we have. I've been here 20 years and it has occurred, and it's really devastating. And then, of course, school staff can play a really important role in recognizing students at risk, and I will talk about that today. So here is a little bit of information. By the way, this presentation is going to be shared with everyone. There are many active links in here that you can click on to get more information, including the law here. But also, there's a lot of resources at the end. So if there's anything that you need, any help you need, any resources for a family member or friend, you can get that here in this presentation. So the mandatory training requires the training of all school staff, as well as education of all students in grades 6 through 12, which we did start last year through health classes. And then we also have to adopt a suicide prevention policy in our district, which we are working on. I do want to mention, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Nathan Bruno Act Nathan Bruno was a student at Portsmouth High School who died by suicide in 2018. Jason Flatt was a student in Tennessee who died by suicide in 1997. The Jason Foundation was created. Jason's parents got together, created this foundation, and then the Nathan Bruno's parents partnered with that foundation to really push for this act to go into effect in Rhode Island. What it looks like in Burrillville. So we are training everyone, every adult in this school system has to get the presentation, which is why we're filming it today. This portion, this half an hour portion, is the overview of suicide prevention, and then you all will be doing an online training, which is an hour. It's called SOS, Signs of Suicide for School Staff. It's more a training to talk about how to talk with your students if a student is expressing suicidal thoughts, how to talk to anyone if they're expressing suicidal thoughts. And it is a pretty interactive online module for an hour that you will complete at some point in the next day or two. And then after that, there will be follow-up information at each school at a faculty meeting, particularly information about where to report your concerns, because every school is a little bit different, who to go to if you have a concern. So you'll have that information at a faculty meeting after you do the online training. Students in grades 6 through 12 have already gotten the SOS curriculum and health classes, and that will continue, which is nice. We have the same curriculum as the students, different format. And then we are drafting that policy with district attorneys right now for the suicide prevention. So I'm going to go through some data and definitions. I'm not going to read all the slides to you, but you can take a look at them, and if you miss some, we will be able to go back when you get the presentation and take a look. So I think the most important thing is to know that at least 1 in 5 children will have some serious mental health issue. And I think that number is higher since COVID. These numbers are from 2016. So we can think about 20% of youth, but possibly higher. Really important to know that 50% of all lifetime mental health issues begin by age 14. So begin before they enter high school. And I'm sure those of you in elementary and middle school see that. You can see students who are struggling with mental health issues as early as kindergarten. And it's really important to think, a lot of those students are going to show those signs before they enter high school. This was taken from 2019 CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And again, pre-pandemic, but it does show that there was an increase in mental health issues over a course of 10 years, 2009 to 2019. 11% versus 16% of students had made a suicide plan. Again, I believe those numbers are higher post-pandemic or since 2020. And here's an example of something from the CDC looking at mental health during the pandemic. 1 out of every 3 students had poor mental health, it's high. 2 out of every 5 felt emotional distress during the past year. And this is from 2021. And 1 out of every 10 students attempted suicide, according to this survey that they gave out in 2021. And this was teens. So just some definitions for you all. Here's the official definition of suicide. I would like to address the language. There's reasons why that language on the left is problematic and should try to be avoided. I know we don't talk about this topic a lot, but if we do talk about the topic, really try to avoid talking about committed, successful, or failed. Those are really strong words. We don't ever want to talk about a successful attempt or a failed attempt, or that there's made a commitment to suicide. So preferred language, died by suicide, took their own life, made a suicide attempt, or a non-fatal attempt. This is the language that is being used now, just so you're aware. Sometimes you may hear suicidal ideation, sometimes referred to as SI, or suicidal behavior. Here's the difference. Suicidal ideation is thinking about, considering, planning to take one's life, a desire to be dead, etc. Behavior is actually injury to oneself, at least some level of intent, or even gathering the means for a plan. Any type of action that seems like they're going to be harming themselves, killing themselves. A risk assessment. I know you all have heard this as well. A risk assessment is an intervention. So we're trying to assess the risk of the student in school. And it's typically an evaluation of some sort, looking at risk of students. It's conducted by some type of mental health provider in the school. Typically, it's our school psychologists, social workers, student assistance counselors, or guidance counselors. Or students may go outside and have a mental health evaluation done at a hospital or by an outside clinician. We evaluate both suicide risk as well as protective factors, which is really important. And here in Our school district, we've adopted using the Columbia scale. So anyone who's familiar with that, it's a pretty standard questionnaire that you ask students who are at risk. A lot of people are familiar with the Columbia scale, so it's pretty standardized. And then a risk level is determined and recommendations are made for additional support. Sometimes we in the school will do a risk assessment, feel the student's really high at risk, and we'll send them out to an emergency room or to their own clinician, as an example. And then more definitions, a suicide attempt, and then postvention. I do want to talk a little bit about postvention. It is a topic that has to be discussed as part of the awareness training. So postvention is a crisis intervention strategy that the district is going to outline in our policy, so that if there is some type of suicide loss in our community, whether it be a student or an adult, we have a plan of how we're going to take care of it, support the community, really support everyone that we can. One of the reasons why is because it reduces the risk of contagion. And if you haven't heard of contagion, it's when there is a suicide in the community, and it has happened that it tends to affect others so much that other adults or students think about hurting themselves or actually attempt. And so in order to try to reduce that risk, we provide a lot of support in the community. So postvention is around that crisis intervention support. It also helps to address the social stigma, provide support to the survivors, family members, and really disseminate factual information. So our policy will have information about postvention in it as well. All right, so here's more practical what you all have to look for in the classroom, so risk factors. I want to emphasize this doesn't mean that if you have a student that has one of these behaviors or situations, doesn't mean they are going to make a suicide attempt, but they are more at risk. So, and the more risk factors a student has, the higher at risk they are. So here is a list, it's not a complete list, but it is a list of some of the risk factors that you may see with students and adults. And if you notice a student that has several of those, they are higher risk. I mentioned protective factors. These are the factors that might help build resiliency in the student and lessen the risk. So they might have risk factors, but then there's protective factors. So when we do a risk assessment, we do think about, are they in mental health treatment? Do they have connections with family, with school members, with community members? How are their problem-solving skills? Can they manage conflict? Can they manage emotions, etc.? And really, school community is a big piece. If you have heard of the word or the term school connectedness, it's a big topic. We have a connection screening at the high school and the middle school because of that very reason, to look at connections among students and adults. And one of the reasons is because it is a protective factor. And it has been shown through research that students who are connected to an adult are less likely to have mental health issues, less likely to attempt suicide. So here are, as I just said, some protective factors that schools can help build. I think we all do this. I know right now, Kindness Matters is our initiative. I think that's going to go really far with this, with building a positive school community. Here are some other examples of what we can do in the schools. What should you do if a student expresses suicidal thoughts or behaviors? As Dr. Salido said, say something. See something, say something. Hear something, say something. So if you have a concern about a student, be sure you report the concern to the appropriate adults. First of all, if the student is with you and they're talking with you, continue to talk with them and make sure you supervise them until another adult intervenes. Every school, hopefully, by your faculty meeting, will have a flow chart of where to express concerns. I'm just gonna show you the flow chart that we have at the high school. I know it's a lot of words. I just want you to see that we separated the areas, crisis versus non-crisis, and we're hoping that every school will use this and make their own if they don't have it already. It's great for teachers. Okay, a student said, they said this, where do I go? A student said they're feeling sad, where do I go? So you kind of have a idea of where to report. Also at the bottom, we have our members of the student services team, so you have their extensions. And there are active links in this form and information regarding DCYF, for example, because that information is on here too. Also, always alert your administrator. If you have concerns about a student, whether it's suicidal concerns, homicidal concerns, make sure your administrator knows. Typically, for a student reporting any type of suicidal behavior, you would refer to a mental health provider for them to do a risk assessment, and also the administrator. Here are some warning signs of suicide. This first slide is maybe more the obvious warning signs, things that if you saw these or heard these, you would be really concerned. You would think, okay, something's not right here immediately. Some people aren't aware that sometimes there's calling people to say goodbye, giving away items, or just talking about feeling trapped, feeling burdened. Those are some of the, I guess, more obvious signs. And then these signs as well, maybe not as obvious, but definitely something to keep in mind if you see a student or an adult who has a lot of this going on. You really want to keep an eye on them, especially if it's not their normal behavior. So one of the reasons why we really emphasize connectedness is if we get to know our students, we'll notice a big change in their behavior. A student who's generally happy-go-lucky, and then all of a sudden they have extreme mood swings, they're isolating, that is reason to have a red flag and really be careful with the student, monitor the student, taking care of them. Substance abuse, another one. A reminder that warning signs can show up in many different forms, so it's not just talking. It could be artwork, art teachers, keep an eye out. It could be writing, English teachers, or anyone really who assigns an essay or a writing prompt. You could see it in their writing. Students may be texting their friends, and a friend comes to you and says, I have this really concerning text on my phone. Social media, not that we're supposed to be patrolling social media, but if someone shows you a post on social media, take it seriously. Resources. So we have quite a bit of resources here. I'm just going to go through a few of them. The main suicide prevention resource right now is the new, it was formerly the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's now called the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and it's a 3-digit code, 988. You all probably have heard about this. It changed from a very long number to an easy to remember one, and you can call, text, or chat it anytime, 24/7. I would say this is the primary resource we want to give our students. I also linked some other resources here in case anyone needs more information. These are some agencies that cover these topics. The top one is specific to Rhode Island. There is a national NAMI as well, but this one's for Rhode Island. And then here are some resources within Rhode Island. KidsLink, probably you've heard of this. This is a number that anyone can call to get help for kids, questions, access, resources. It's a great crisis hotline for kids in Rhode Island, specific to Rhode Island residents. And BH-Link is for adults. We also have resources here. As BSC employees, just started last year, so All One Help has our employee assistance program. I know Robin Commission sent some information out last year. If you missed it, there is a website on the BSC staff start page that has EAP information. There was also a great 8-minute introductory video about the different services that EAP offers that was sent out around February. I'm gonna see if we can get that posted on that page as well. But here are some of the things that this service offers. The main piece is that it is confidential. We have this as an employee, but the school department doesn't find out if we call. If we access mental health counseling, if we access legal and financial resources, it is all confidential, free, and it's available 24/7. A lot of it is telehealth, online, going through the website. Super helpful, great resource. The phone number is there, the website is there, and I'm sure that if you go on the website and the staff start page, you'll get more information as well. They do offer some series too, where they'll do a little presentation on a topic, and those are on the website too. So great resource for adults. Oh, and also it's for you and your family members. I also wanted to share our local mental health resources. Oftentimes I have people asking me, I have a parent who's looking for resources, or I have a student who wants to go into counseling. And I can certainly give that information to families, but you can as well. we maintain this mental health tab on our Burrillville School Department website, and it has up-to-date information on local counseling resources. So, and you can just give this link to families. At the top, there's an overview of the social emotional supports. This was a presentation that Laura Dietrich and I gave to the Burrillville Special Ed Advisory Committee, and we taped it. But then as you scroll down, we have a page that is all emergency resources, and this can be printed as well for parents. And then you keep scrolling down, and we have a page of local counseling resources. We updated this in January. We try to update it every 6 months or so. Things change a lot in terms of openings, telehealth, in person, but it's pretty updated right now. And it's just a bunch of different agencies as well as individuals in private practice, and then some substance abuse prevention intervention information at the end. And then at the bottom, we have our district support services team listed, everyone's role and their emails. Parents need to contact us. So again, I think it's a great resource, and you can certainly just share that link with families at any time. If you notice something that needs to be updated, you can just let one of your school psychologists or social workers know, and we'll get that done. And as Dr. Salito said, we do have 2 district initiatives this year, and I think they really tie in well to suicide prevention as well as to school safety, which I'm going to talk about next. See something, say something. And that kind of ties right into threat assessment. How am I doing? Oh, good. All right. So I'm going to finish the presentation, and then we'll see if we have questions at the end. So I have about 15 minutes left for threat assessment. So here are some, I don't think I have to explain what this is. I think you all can see, look at these dates and these places, and know that these are some of the 4 deadliest school shootings that we've had in the past 2 decades or so. Brings up a lot of emotion, I'm sure. People still ask, however, why is this a school's responsibility? I've given this presentation to other districts, and I have resistance. People will say, we shouldn't be doing this. If someone's saying that they want to shoot up the school or bomb the school, we should send them out for an emergency evaluation. And that's it. The school department should not be involved. And I'm going to tell you why that actually doesn't work very well. So first of all, studies of past school shootings, as well as research on violence in schools, has revealed that before a school shooting, the shooter usually tells someone, and in many cases, it's a peer or a classmate. That is a fact that is through all the research, and there's a lot of research out there. So we need to educate our students about see something, say something, as well as our teachers, because the students are probably going to hear it first. Here are some more reasons, in case that's not convincing enough. So we know our students the best, right? We're connecting with our students daily. We have the most information on our students. If we send a student out to the hospital, they have limited knowledge. They're crazy busy, they're in and out, do a quick evaluation, send the kid back to school. So they're going to have no information except what the student tells them, typically, and then they're going to have an emergency eval and say, they're safe to return, they're going to come back to school, and they're going to have no documentation. And that's pretty much standard for what happens when you send a student out for an assessment. Sorry, but that's the facts. So the student comes back, and we have to provide the interventions. We have to provide the support, and many times we don't even know what questions were asked of the student. So different from a risk assessment. When I say threat assessment, we're talking about a student who has a threat to another student, a group of students, or the school, as an example, and we are conducting an assessment to determine level of risk and to provide the supports needed. It is done by a team of educators. It's not done by one person. There has to be a team working on this, and there are many reasons for that. One of them is in past school shootings prior to Sandy Hook, I would say, or even after Sandy Hook, one person was conducting an assessment on a student, said, oh yeah, they're safe, and then the student went and committed some act of violence, and that person was liable. And we don't ever want that to happen. We want to have a team making the decision, not just one person. Pretty obvious. And like I said, it's different from a risk assessment. If a student is expressing harm to him or herself, we have that Columbia scale. We do a risk assessment and we determine whether they need to be sent out. So the threat assessment team in each school includes at least 3 members. I will say at this point, aside from our new mental health providers who were just hired this year, everyone in our schools on the threat assessment team has been trained. I made sure to do training and follow-up training as well for everyone, so they're all trained on threat assessment and how to conduct a threat assessment within the schools. And the new folks will get that training as soon as we can. By the way, the 2 workshops I attended at NASP were done by an expert, Dr. Linda Kanan. She was in Colorado. She's been on tons of boards regarding threat assessment, and she kind of is like the gold standard for threat assessment. And all the information that she provided in those 2 workshops was enough to be trained so that I could train others. So that's kind of where that happened. I've spoken to her and got permission to use her slides as well. She was excellent. And one of the biggest things was, don't ever do this alone. You have to do it as a team. So a little bit of information about school shootings. I've done a lot of research in this area. This was an area of interest of mine after I attended that first workshop. The U.S. Secret Service put out a really important document. It's 20 years old, but it's still the gold standard in threat assessment. It was called the Safe School Initiative Report. It was done after extensive research, not just school shootings, but on shootings, mass shootings in general. And they looked at all those shootings and kind of came up with a report about things to help us and what to look for. There's no profile of a school shooter. However, things we know, that attackers talk about their plans, they make plans, it's rarely impulsive. Sometimes they're making plans for weeks. I'm sure you've gone back and heard from some of the school shootings that weeks and weeks they were making plans, they were telling people, they were posting on social media. They had easy access to guns, they were often encouraged by others in some way, shape, or form. Bullying sometimes is a factor, and as I had mentioned, warning signs are common. So, of that study, most attackers engaged in some behavior prior to the attack that caused adult concern. And that is why it's so important for us to be aware of our students and to know how our students are and if we see a change in behavior. The FBI followed up with a study in 2018 where they looked specifically at shootings from 2000 to 2013. And they were looking at, there was 2 phases of the study, but the phase that I'm talking about is where they were looking at motives and what happened right prior to the attack and how students may, or adults, whoever was a shooter, may have shown some type of concerning behavior. 2 pieces from this that I think are really important. On average, each active shooter displayed 4 to 5 concerning behaviors over time that were observable to others. And oftentimes, for active shooters under age 18, so for students who were involved in a school shooting, peers and teachers were more likely to observe the concerning behaviors than family members. Peers and teachers saw these behaviors much more than family members. So not to put all the burden on everyone here, but we have to be looking out for this because we're probably going to be the ones who see it. Okay. I showed this video 4 years ago. Some of you will probably remember it. It's 2 minutes, very powerful. I'm showing it again. And is there sound?
Yeah, I didn't know there was sound in it.
Okay.
I didn't know you had a video there. So.
You know what? I'm going to skip the video because you need the sound to understand what's going on. And when you get promise me, when you get this presentation, you all watch the video because it's really important and it's really powerful, and then you can watch it by yourself and you can think about it because it does elicit some emotions. So we'll skip that. The video is basically about looking at warning signs, and most people who watch it the first time, even if I give you this clue, you're going to miss the warning signs, and that is one of the reasons why I like to show it and have people think about it. All right, so prevention is key. So we really need to work on creating a culture of caring in every school. I know we have PBIS, we have a connection screener at the secondary level. Some of you have been looking at connections at elementary level as well. think the most important thing is that we're reaching out to students who may need support, and that we do this ongoing awareness and training every few years so people are thinking about what are the signs. Sandy Hook has a great website. It's called the Sandy Hook Promise. They have the Start With Hello program, just being kind. That's pretty much what we're doing. And say something. If you see something, hear something, say something. Those materials can be found at that link. And they also have that video that I was going to show. It's called the Edmund video. Just a few pieces of information about what happens when a threat assessment occurs in school. Some of you may have reported a student who you were concerned about who made a threat, and you wonder, like, what happened after that? So the first piece, the threat is always reported to an administrator, okay? Directly to an administrator. A screening occurs. An administrator and a mental health provider talk with the student, look at the information we have, and decide if it is a credible threat, and if we have to go into a full threat assessment team. So there's a screening first, and the reason why is because sometimes a teacher overhears a student say something in the hall. We pull the student in, they were talking about a movie. We have every reason to believe that they were talking about a movie. We look at their records, we kind of do a little bit of a record review and know the student's history, and we don't have concern that they were making a threat towards the school. At that point, we would stop. We would always call the parent. You're on the side of caution, let the parent know why the student came in, what happened, monitor the student, but we may not go to a full threat assessment. If we determine that the threat is credible and legitimate, we do move to the full threat assessment team. So now we have 3 people, administrator, mental health provider, school resource officer, at least, and then other people as needed. Sometimes we have a teacher come in, behavior specialist, TA, someone else who knows the student so that they can share information and help us collect that information. And we're gathering a lot of information, a lot of records, and we're also interviewing the student. And it's a mental health interview by a mental health provider, and there's 5 pages of questions that we have to go through. Anyone who's been involved in full threat assessment knows it takes about the whole day. If it starts at 9 a.m. and you're collecting information, talking with the student, and interviewing teachers, and interviewing other students, it can last hours and hours. It really eats up a lot of time, but it's important to be thorough. After we have all the information, we organize it, we analyze it, and we determine the level of concern. No matter what, if it's low risk, moderate risk, or high risk, we are putting a plan in place for the student. If the student made some type of threat, even if they're saying, oh, I was just kidding, we monitor that student, we put a plan in place. And so one of the things that Dr. Kanan talked about was planting trees. And that just means putting supports in place to help the student. So there's some examples of supports that we may put in place for students. We always involve the family. The family has to know. The family actually comes in, and we interview the family. Obviously, we document it, and then we continue monitoring the student. Sometimes the student might be sent out for an emergency evaluation. I'll tell you what's really common is a student comes in for a threat assessment, and as part of that threat assessment, one of the mental health questions is about risk assessment. Are they thinking about hurting themselves or killing themselves? And oftentimes students are also suicidal. We may have to send them out for an evaluation just on that alone. So oftentimes that does happen. Alerting teachers. So there is a duty to warn. There's a duty to warn the target, the person who is targeted. So if a student is threatening another student, we must let that student know. If that other student is under 18, we must let the parent know as their guardian. If we do conduct a threat assessment, the teachers of the student should be informed. That is part of FERPA. It's a need to know, but only the teachers of the student. So the teachers who see the student and interact with the student on a daily basis or every other day, those are the teachers that are told. We don't tell the whole school, and it doesn't get documented in their regular file. It is something that we write a critical incident report, and it goes over to the central office. And all our critical incident reports are maintained there. Here are just some suggestions on how to connect with students, get to know your students. Fostering connections is critical. That was like one of the big things that the Safe School Initiative report talked about, was that people knew, and if you know your students well, you'll know when you see a change in behavior. These are some of the warning signs of at-risk students that could be potentially violent, but as you see, a lot of overlap with these warning signs, as well as the warning signs for students who may potentially be suicidal, which is the reason why I thought these two topics went together really well. And some of these, you've seen already in the other slide. If you have a concern about a student who's expressing some type of threat, please tell the administrator, encourage your students to do the same. That whole see something, say something. Pay attention to the artwork, the writing, direct threats as well as indirect threats. And a student may say, like, I'm gonna bring a gun to school. That's obviously a direct threat. But a student may also tell someone else, don't come to school tomorrow, just a warning. That would be an indirect threat. If a student has made a threat and they're with you, don't leave them alone, don't send them to the next class. Please keep them, if you can, supervise them until an administrator comes to your room. And again, similar to the warning signs of suicide, can be expressed in many different forms. So you have to really keep an eye out. And then some resources that I have, these are all specific to school shootings and threat assessment procedures. It's really interesting information. If anyone wants to delve deeper, some of these links are really good and can give you more information. And just in time, yes. So I wanted to thank you all for your attention. Very important topics. I appreciate everyone's attention to this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to see me or email me, and I'm happy to answer them. I know we have a meeting coming up, so I'm going to give it over to Dr. Salito.
Thanks, Kim.